Banu's life was marked by hardship and struggle from the very beginning. Orphaned at a young age, he had no family to care for him, no land to call his own, and no real home. His world was one of constant toil and effort, but despite working tirelessly every day, his life never seemed to improve. He lived in a small village, nestled among the hills, surrounded by others who were also struggling to get by. Yet, in spite of the difficulties he faced, Banu was known for his remarkable kindness. Even though he had nothing himself, he was always willing to lend a helping hand to those around him. Banu's heart was full of compassion, and it was this quality that set him apart from the others in his village. While many of the villagers were focused solely on their own survival, Banu went out of his way to help anyone in need. It didn't matter whether the person was rich or poor, whether they could offer him anything in return. He simply gave because he believed it was the right thing to do. His actions spoke louder than words. Although Banu was often mocked by others, especially for his willingness to care for people when he could barely take care of himself, he never let the criticism affect him. To them, he was foolish, a young man who couldn't even secure his own future, yet spent what little he had helping others. But to Banu, the needs of those around him mattered more than his own. He believed that true kindness was not about receiving something in return, but about giving selflessly, regardless of personal gain. In many ways, Banu's kindness was a form of resistance against the harsh realities of his life. While the village around him struggled to survive, he continued to give, never expecting anything in return. And though his own life was difficult, his heart remained open to others, showing that true generosity comes from a place of deep compassion and understanding. He refused to let the poverty or suffering around him diminish his ability to care. Instead, he used his lack of resources to fuel his empathy, believing that if he could bring a little joy or relief to someone else, it would be worth the sacrifice. Banu's story was one of resilience. Even in the face of his own personal difficulties, he remained unwavering in his desire to help others. It was a life defined not by material wealth, but by the wealth of his heart, a heart that, despite its own struggles, sought to bring comfort and care to the lives of those around him. And in that simple yet profound way, Banu's kindness became the most valuable thing he had to offer. In the same village, there lived an old widow named May. Life had been unkind to her as well. She had lost her only son in a war long ago, and the grief from that loss weighed heavily on her. Over time, the sorrow of losing her child took its toll on her health, and she gradually lost her sight. Blind and alone, May spent her days sitting in the corner of her small, crumbling house, awaiting the inevitable end of her lonely existence. The world she once knew had faded into darkness, and she felt as if she had been abandoned by everything and everyone. The villagers, though sympathetic, never truly understood the depth of her pain. They would sometimes drop by to leave food at her door out of pity, but that was where their involvement ended. No one took the time to truly listen to her or comfort her, and May's sorrow grew deeper with each passing day. Her heart had grown heavy with the weight of her isolation. She had no family left to care for her, and the people who lived in the village seemed to forget about her suffering. Banu, who had little to call his own, was different. One day, as he walked through the village, he noticed the condition of May's house. The dust and neglect made it clear that she'd been alone for a long time. Without hesitation, Banu decided to check on her. He knocked gently on her door and, sensing her presence inside, called out softly, "Mother, how are you? Do you need help with anything?" When May heard his voice, tears welled up in her blind eyes. She had never imagined that anyone would care enough to reach out to her. Her voice trembled as she replied, "Son, I am just waiting for my time to end. No one cares for me, and I cannot even see the world anymore." Banu's heart ached as he listened to her words. He could feel her pain, and he understood the loneliness that had consumed her. Without a second thought, he knelt beside her and spoke gently. "You are not alone, Mother. I am here, and I will take care of you." From that moment on, Banu made it his responsibility to care for May. He didn't hesitate or question his decision, even though he himself had very little. His love for her grew deeper with each passing day, and he continued to offer her comfort and companionship. He visited her every day, helping her with whatever she needed, and his simple act of kindness gave her a sense of hope that she had not felt in years. From that moment on, Banu took it upon himself to care for May, even though his own life was far from easy. Every day he worked tirelessly during the daylight hours, struggling to earn enough to survive. But no matter how exhausted he was from his own work, he always made sure to spend his evenings with May. He would sit with her, listening to her stories, offering comfort, and helping her with anything she needed. Despite his own poverty, Banu was determined to ensure that May would never feel alone or unloved again. The villagers, however, did not understand Banu's selfless commitment. They saw the boy who had nothing, yet chose to care for an elderly widow, and they didn't know what to make of it. They shook their heads in disbelief, whispering among themselves. "What a foolish boy," they would say. "He can't even take care of himself, and yet he's wasting his time looking after someone who can't help him in return. He should be thinking about his future." But Banu never let their words deter him. He didn't care about the judgment of others. To him, his promise to May was more important than any opinion or harsh word. He had made a vow to never leave her side, and he meant to keep it. He knew that May needed him, and in that need he found a sense of purpose. While the villagers criticized him, Banu kept his focus on what mattered. He saw May's declining health, and he couldn't stand to watch her suffer in silence. He did everything in his power to bring some comfort into her life. Whether it was helping her with her daily tasks, comforting her during moments of sadness, or simply being there to listen, Banu's care was constant and unwavering. Over time, the people in the village began to notice the changes in May. She seemed to be growing stronger, her spirit lifting in a way that none of them had expected. The woman who had once been a picture of sorrow and despair now smiled more often, and her health, which had been deteriorating, began to show signs of improvement. Slowly, she started to regain some strength, both physically and emotionally. Banu's dedication to May didn't go unnoticed, even if the villagers weren't yet able to understand it fully. They could see that something was changing in her, and it made them wonder, perhaps there was more to this boy's kindness than they had first realized. But Banu didn't need their approval. He knew the power of his actions, and his heart was full, knowing he was doing the right thing, no matter what others said. As time passed, May's health began to improve, and the change was nothing short of remarkable. The frail, blind widow, who had once been confined to the corners of her small house, lost in grief and despair, was slowly beginning to regain her strength. It was as if Banu's care had breathed new life into her. Her body, once weak and frail, was growing stronger day by day, and her spirit, which had been clouded by years of sorrow, was beginning to shine once again. Banu's presence had brought a sense of hope to May that she hadn't felt in years. The simple act of kindness, the selflessness with which Banu gave his time and energy, had made a profound impact on her. She no longer felt abandoned by the world, and for the first time in a long while, she was able to see a glimmer of light in her life. In a moment of deep gratitude, May placed her trembling hands on Banu's head. Her voice, filled with emotion, trembled as she spoke. "Son, Your kindness is the greatest gift I have received. May God reward you for your selflessness." Banu, though deeply touched by her words, did not seek any reward or recognition. His heart was full simply because he had been able to help May. He did not expect anything in return for his actions, and the genuine love he had for her was enough to fill his soul. But May's blessing, though simple, was deeply meaningful to him. It was a reminder that sometimes the greatest rewards come not in material form, but in the profound impact we have on each other's lives. Banu continued to care for May with the same dedication and love, even as the seasons changed and his own struggles persisted. He worked tirelessly during the day to make a living, and in the evenings he made sure that May was never alone, always by her side, making sure she had everything she needed. Over time, her health continued to improve, and the villagers began to notice the transformation in her. They saw how her spirit had been lifted, and they were amazed by the young man's dedication. One evening, as Banu sat by May's side, she turned to him and said, "You have done what no one else would have, and your kindness has changed my life. I will be forever grateful to you, my son." Banu simply smiled, knowing that his efforts had brought her the peace and comfort she so desperately needed. His heart was content, knowing that, through his compassion, he had made a difference in her life, just as she had made a difference in his. A few months after Banu had begun caring for May, disaster struck the village. A terrible drought came, causing the rivers to dry up and crops to wither. The land that had once been fertile and abundant was now parched and cracked, and the villagers quickly found themselves without enough food or water to survive. Desperation set in as the once thriving community struggled to endure the harsh conditions. People who had once been neighbors now turned against each other, scrambling for what little resources were left. Those who could afford to leave packed up their belongings and fled the village in search of better opportunities elsewhere. Banu, despite his own suffering, refused to leave May behind. He knew that she depended on him, and he could not abandon her no matter how difficult things became. Though his own food supply had run out, Banu shared the last bits of his remaining food with her. He would go without meals himself, choosing to starve in order to make sure she had something to eat. As the days passed, Banu grew weaker from hunger, but he continued to care for May with unwavering dedication. One evening, as Banu struggled to remain on his feet, May noticed how gaunt and tired he had become. Concerned for his well-being, she called out to him, her voice shaky with worry. "Son, why are you putting your life in danger for me? I am old and weak, and you are young. Let me go, and you save yourself," she urged. Banu, though visibly exhausted, took her hand gently and responded with quiet determination. "Mother, I will never leave you. My life is in serving you, and I would rather go hungry than see you suffer. I will never let you face this alone." Despite his own weakness, Banu's resolve remained unshaken. His love and commitment to May were stronger than the pain he was enduring. He would not allow her to feel the crushing weight of solitude, not after everything she had been through. As the night drew on, hunger and exhaustion took their toll on both of them. Just when they thought they couldn't go on, there was a sudden knock at the door. Banu, gathering the last bit of strength he had, rose to answer it. Standing in the doorway was a wandering sage, weary from his travels and asking for food. Without hesitation, Banu offered the last of his meager provisions, even though he and May had nothing left. May gasped in sorrow, knowing they had no food left for themselves, but the sage smiled warmly and said, "Your kindness has been seen by the heavens. The blessings of God are upon you." And with that, he vanished, leaving behind only his words of blessing. The next morning, as the sun rose over the parched village, something extraordinary began to happen. Dark clouds began to gather in the sky, and the air that had been dry and still the day before now felt heavy with anticipation. The villagers, who had grown accustomed to the unbearable heat and the endless drought, looked up in surprise. For the first time in months, there was a shift in the weather, and the promise of rain seemed more than just a distant hope. As the clouds thickened, the first few drops of rain began to fall, hitting the dusty ground with a soft thud. The villagers stared in awe, unable to believe their eyes. The rain came down steadily at first, then began to pour in torrents, soaking the land and filling the empty riverbeds with water once more. The drought that had ravaged their crops and left them on the brink of despair was finally over. The land, once dry and barren, was now being refreshed as the rain brought life back to the village. The miracle didn't stop there. As the rain continued to fall, the crops that had once been withered and lifeless began to show signs of new growth. The villagers, who had once mocked Bennu for his selflessness and dedication to caring for May, now stood in awe of the miracle that seemed to have come as a direct result of his kindness. They couldn't deny the connection between Bennu's acts of compassion and the sudden turn of fortune in their village. What had once seemed like a foolish, self-sacrificial act now appeared to have been a catalyst for the transformation that was unfolding before their eyes. The news of the miracle spread quickly, and soon the entire village was talking about Bennu's kindness. The sage's words, "Your kindness has been seen by the heavens," seemed to ring true as the rain poured down and the fields began to flourish. The villagers couldn't help but reflect on their earlier judgment of Bennu. They had criticized him for caring for an old woman when he had so little, but now they saw that his selflessness had brought about something far greater than anyone could have imagined. As the rain continued to nourish the land, the villagers who had once looked down on Bennu began to reconsider their earlier attitudes. They could see now that his acts of kindness had not only saved May, but had brought prosperity back to the village as well. The drought had ended, the crops were growing again, and hope had been restored. The miracle of the rain was a clear reminder that kindness, no matter how small or unnoticed, has the power to bring about great change. The miracle of rain marked a turning point, not only for the land, but also for Bennu's life. The once dry, barren village began to thrive again, and the crops that had withered under the drought's grip were now growing tall and green. The villagers, who had once mocked Bennu for his seemingly foolish devotion to an old widow when he had nothing of his own, now found themselves in awe of the transformation taking place. They could no longer deny the connection between Bennu's kindness and the miracle that had occurred. It was as if the heavens themselves had rewarded his selflessness. The villagers, who had once seen him as a naive, misguided young man, now began to recognize the depth of Bennu's character. They realized that in helping May, Bennu had done something far more profound than just offering her physical care. He had given her something that no amount of wealth or material possessions could replace: hope. And in doing so, he had brought something far greater than just sustenance to the village. He had brought the very spirit of compassion and community back to life. As the village began to recover from the drought, the villagers who had once judged Bennu harshly came forward to offer their support. They approached him with a newfound respect, apologizing for their previous words and actions. The change in their attitudes was clear, and many of them were eager to make amends for their past behavior. Realizing the power of kindness, they sought to repay Bennu for the sacrifices he had made and the good he had done. To show their gratitude, the villagers gifted Bennu a beautiful piece of land, something that he had never imagined would be within his reach. With the hard work and determination that had always defined him, Bennu transformed the land into a thriving farm. Over time, his efforts bore fruit, and his once poor existence was replaced with a prosperous life. But even as his circumstances changed, Bennu never wavered in his commitment to May. He continued to care for her, ensuring that she had everything she needed until her final breath. Banu's story spread far beyond the village, inspiring others who heard it to reflect on the power of kindness. His selfless acts of compassion had not only transformed his life, but had also inspired others to live with greater empathy and care for one another. Banu became a symbol of compassion, a living testament to the truth that genuine kindness, no matter how small or unseen, never goes unnoticed. His story was a reminder that when we give without expecting anything in return, life has a way of rewarding us in ways we could never predict. As time passed, Banu's life continued to change for the better. The villagers who had once dismissed him as a foolish boy now saw him in a new light. They recognized the power of his kindness, not only in how it had transformed May's life, but also in the way it had revived the village. What had once seemed like a small act of selflessness had snowballed into something much larger, proving that even the simplest gestures of compassion could have a profound impact on an entire community. Banu's story became known far and wide, inspiring people from distant lands to come and learn from his example. The young man who had nothing, yet gave everything, became a symbol of selfless love and compassion. His willingness to care for May when he had nothing left to give, and his steadfast determination to help her despite the harshest conditions, became a reminder to everyone who heard his story. Kindness, when given freely and without expectation, has the power to change lives. In the end, Banu's life was filled with blessings beyond what he could have ever imagined. The land that the villagers had gifted him flourished under his hard work, and he built a prosperous farm that provided for him and for others. But the greatest reward was not in the material wealth he acquired. It was in the peace and fulfillment that came from knowing he had lived a life of purpose and love. As May passed away, her last words to him were filled with gratitude and love. Banu had kept his promise to her until the very end, and he never once regretted his decision to care for her. The story of his unwavering compassion continued to live on, teaching others the true value of kindness. It was a reminder that the greatest gifts we can give are not the ones that come with a price tag, but the ones that come from the heart. In our own lives, we often find ourselves caught up in the rush for success, wealth, and personal gain. But Banu's story shows us that true richness comes not from what we accumulate, but from how we care for others. It teaches us that kindness, even in the face of hardship, is never wasted. Just as Banu's acts of selflessness brought blessings to his life and his village, our own acts of kindness can create ripples that extend far beyond what we may ever see. The power of compassion has the ability to transform lives, heal wounds, and bring hope where there was once despair. In a world that often feels divided, Banu's story reminds us that love and kindness have the power to unite us all.